There's something that I really fucking hate. Games that are grindy for the sake of being grindy. There's been a trend in recent years of games that seem to be artificially made longer or bigger than needed in order to become more marketable. For discussion purposes, I'm going to be using Ubisoft as a prime example. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a game I've talked about in the past, but it's such a perfect instance of a game that I feel is just long for the sake of being long. Every enemy has a level, which makes it fucking impossible to beat them without grinding enough time, which just seems like a way to artificially make a game longer. I don't want to play as some mercenary that has to go on fetch quests to somehow make themselves deal more damage with a sharper sword that looks exactly the same as their old one. I want to play as John Wick, who can kill an entire room full of people with a fucking pencil. Designing harder enemies shouldn't be about simply making them sponges that take more bullets to bring down. They should instead infuse variety into the combat and force a player to adapt in order to succeed. Mowing down 1,000 enemies that have a level of variety is so much more satisfying than simply dumping damage into a few of the same people until their life bars are depleted. Games at the end of the day should make a player feel satisfied, but I feel as if this has recently taken a backseat to other priorities. People want to know how long it will take to complete a game, but in the end, the answer is completely irrelevant. Anyone who watches YouTube can tell you that a longer video doesn't imply more content, and a 10-minute video is usually just a 3-minute video with 7 minutes of filler. This isn't always the case, but the point still stands that actual content is very different from the length of a game. The average Call of Duty campaign is maybe 6 to 10 hours long, but no one ever gave a shit about the length because not a single second was wasted with filler content. If a game is 100 hours long and was genuinely fun and engaging from start to finish, then hats off to the developers. However, if a game is supposedly the same length but is padded by endless collectibles and fetch quests, then I'd honestly rather that be cut out in favor of a smaller but more focused and enjoyable experience. Also, look how fucking enormous this game is when it really doesn't need to be even a quarter of its size. Much like the Just Cause series, Assassin's Creed Odyssey just seems to have such a large world, so the marketing team can flex their muscles. Worlds should only be as big as they need to be. I don't want to travel 12 fucking kilometers to get to my next objective, or if I'm made to do so, I want the journey there to be at least engaging. I think Skyrim is a perfect example of a game that is able to justify its huge map. For most people, it takes around 2 hours to walk from one side of Skyrim to the other, but you can't even walk 10 fucking steps in this game without finding the start of a 5-hour long quest that actually leads to something interesting. Spider-Man wasn't anywhere near crammed with things to do, but never once does the player feel compelled to fast travel, because simply swinging across the map is so much fucking fun. Think of every game map you've been able to remember better than the area where you currently live, and it will almost always be a much smaller but carefully crafted space that you couldn't help but adore. People who played Simpsons Hit and Run back in 2003 will probably still be able to map out the first level in their head. Similarly, Rust and Nuketown have gone down as the greatest maps in Call of Duty history for being small and compact. If a game simply makes a world big for the sake of being big, it actively detracts from player enjoyment. I couldn't think of a single person who would rather a bigger game world over more interesting things to do within a smaller one. If I'm invested enough to learn an entire map from the top of my head, then the space that's being created has been well designed and memorable. What I'm about to say might simply be an easy scapegoat for unlikable trends that I've personally witnessed, but I'm nevertheless going to make my case. I think business has gotten in the way of better games. Publishers want 3 things. They want selling points, they want higher attention time, and more than anything, they want additional revenue options. Unfortunately, I fear that these things ultimately make a worse product overall. Simply making a standard list of selling points is an awful decision when it comes to actually trying to sell a game. I honestly don't give a flying fuck if a game is 100 hours long, if it's only that length in the first place, because it's been padded out and made worse. I don't give a fuck if a game has 400 weapons, if most of them are just reskinned, or slight variations of a handful of base offerings. Players can see through this shit, and it's such a shame to focus development time into something purely for the sake of marketing, when it could otherwise be used to make a better product overall. Retention time is another worrying request from publishers that can be handled very badly if not enough care is taken. Increasing retention time would ideally be adding more content into a game that is fun and engaging for a player, but very likely it turns out to be the horrific Battlefield method of adding truly awful challenges to unlock exclusive rewards. Frustrating players by requiring them to get 6 throwing knife kills without dying is something that nobody ever wanted. Much like being interrupted by an ad halfway through a YouTube video. Revenue options are the most worrying of these 3 requests. We've already seen time and time again how games get objectively worse when publishers try to push intrusive monetization into their games, but unfortunately, it's hard to see the problem going away anytime soon. Perhaps one of the biggest hurdles to good games being made is the lack of freedom that talented developers have in order to make what they like. You look at every exceptional game that has been made in the last few years, and all of them will have prioritized the creative process over some idiotic marketing stats. They all have a clear, uncompromising vision that was finally realized and ultimately executed. The Phantom Pain from 2015 was the brainchild of Hideo Kojima, which ultimately came out with 12 inches of polish and an easy Game of the Year contender. The Witcher 3 is regarded as one of the most fully realized and consumer-friendly games of all time, simply because the studio never once had to answer to a publisher. 2018's God of War was given over 100 perfect scores, and it can more or less be contributed to the creative director, Cory Barlog, who was said to have been given an exceptional amount of control over the direction and artistic decisions of the game. Red Dead 2 won 175 Game of the Year awards because every single aspect of the game was intentional. The very minimal heads-up display, the hunger and bathing system, the permanence of your horse dying, the extremely unexpected story turns, and the limited gun carrying capacity were all very much premeditated decisions. The game wasn't made to appeal to all people, and it instead made decisions that would likely exclude players in order to properly realize its original and grand vision. The paint strokes of Red Dead were bold, decisive, and intentional, and would scare the absolute shit out of any kind of publisher looking for a safe investment. Ultimately, that's what made the game so good. The point I'm trying to make is that games that simply do what they set out to do and don't have to compromise in order to appeal to a number of different stakeholders will always turn out better than those with such obligations. The current game industry is fucking enormous, with some estimates at well over $100 billion annually. The industry is far from its infancy, and instead of being able to be more creative and flexible, it seems to be pinned down by its adult life, with deadlines and obligations. However, games at the end of the day are a niche form of art. They're an experience that's offered to players to appreciate and enjoy. And like any other art form, they're best left in the hands of an experienced artist. Although, what too often happens is the equivalent of if a guy selling brushes to a painter follows him home, walks into his house, and starts drawing his own shit before the painter is halfway finished. A good business model enables these teams of talented people to make something incredible and trusts that they know how to best do their jobs. Contrary to what is often thrown around by idiots, game developers are very intelligent individuals, and they always have reasoning behind every decision that is made. Every single one of them have ideas on how to make a game better, and it's up to management to ensure that these ideas are encouraged and be able to thrive. The shovel in Far Cry 5 was an idea by a developer that was allowed to flourish. So too was the incredible ping system in Apex Legends and the legendary dramatic chipmunk intro in Overwatch. Game developers know how to make a product better, and ultimately, more than anything else, this will earn exponentially more respect for their brand in the long term. The game industry is currently geared to short-term profits, but it would be very surprising to see publishers who don't shift a focus on their own reputation to be able to thrive in the next console generation. I've talked in the past about why I think Ubisoft has managed to successfully reinvent themselves, even when I don't necessarily embrace their new design philosophies. This might be an idiotic thing to say, but I think Electronic Arts may be attempting the same thing. Hear me out. Electronic Arts have held the exclusive rights to develop Star Wars console games for the last 6 years, meaning there's only 4 years left on their exclusive contract. The amount of money the license would have cost would be astronomical, and in the whole 6 years, the publisher has only been able to produce 2 games, the second of which became one of the most criticized in history and ended up selling far less than its original. With the limited time left, it would be almost unthinkable of the company to not play it safe and at least try to do something meaningful with one of the most valuable franchises in the world. With the announcement of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order being entirely single player and without any microtransactions, which goes against the company's traditional philosophy, this may be the start of a new strategy by Electronic Arts. Combine this with their flagship franchises seeing drastically reduced sales and their more creative endeavors becoming fruitful, it wouldn't be such a stretch to say that Electronic Arts will be able to read the writing on the wall. Perhaps the industry will see a turning point where development teams will become more independent and therefore have more freedom with what they want to make. We've already seen this with Bungie, who bought themselves out of a partnership with Activision and now owns full rights to the Destiny franchise. Going forward, other development teams may be watching on the success of Destiny 3, as it may become the start of a trend that pushes the entire industry in a better direction. Alternatively, at the very least, it will make publishers take notice and be far more willing to trust developers to make games that can sell more copies on their own. It still warms my heart remembering the story of how Vince Zampella was fired from Activision, created his own studio, poached most of his old team, developed objectively better games, then sold out to Activision's direct competitor for $400 million only 7 years later. There's also the possibility of crowd-funded games becoming a larger part of the gaming landscape. However, I personally don't think this will happen. The previous track record seems to be lacking, and I honestly don't think people know what they want in a game until they play it. In the end, this is all just the humble opinion and speculation of some text-to-speech degenerate on the internet. Maybe I'm the only one who appreciates a more focused experience. Maybe publishers will only end up pushing the industry forward, and maybe Electronic Arts will be up to their old tricks sooner than expected. I could continue to offer my insight on these pressing questions, but alternatively, here's Wonderwall.